Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 2, verse 1. Chapter 2, verse 1. So we've set the stage for the general scene in Egypt, and now we get very specific. Vayelach ish mibeis Levi, a man from the house of Levi went, vayikachas bas Levi, and he married a woman, literally bas Levi, the daughter of Levi, but it could also be understood as a woman from the family of Levi. Verse 2, the woman conceived, she gave birth, and she saw the child was good, and she hid him for 3 months. I don't mean to ruin the surprise, but if anyone's not aware, we're talking about Moshe and his parents right now. If anyone didn't pick up on that. And I should also clarify a point that comes up sometimes in discussion in the Rosenbaum home. Not child number 3, Moshe Rosenbaum, but Moshe Rabbeinu. That's a different Moshe. Sometimes it's important to clarify. Okay, but the question is, what does it mean in verse 1 that there was a man who went? It sounds very like folktale-y almost. There was a man who went and married a woman. It doesn't sound very biblical. There was a man who went. Why don't you use the verb? What vayikach, literally vayikach means to take, but it's a language of marriage. Gemara says in various places language of marriage. Let it be that there was a man from Levi who married a woman from Levi. That's it. What did it mean he went? So Ramban on Pasuk Aleph, vayelach ish mibeis Levi, Rabosenu amru, shaholach achar atzas bito. A very, very famous Gemara. I'm sure many of you know this. That his daughter Miriam convinced him to marry Yocheved. And the story is that Amram and Yocheved, Moshe's parents, had been married. They had 2 children, Miriam and Aaron. And then there's this very harsh decree about boys, Jewish boys being born, and what would happen to Jewish boys. So they separated. They didn't want to have any more children. They didn't want to bring children into this world. And the oldest child, Miriam, says to her father, "You're worse than Paro. Paro's making a decree on the males. And you're making a decree on the males and the females. You're not going to have any children." And he thought about it, and he decided to remarry his wife or reconnect with his wife. So what it means he went after his daughter's counsel. A very interesting Gemara. Avram Amar Kipa Arim Rabos Yisrael Yoshim. I'm sure people have picked up by now. The Ibn Ezra's pshat in general is much more literal and kind of down to earth. So the Ibn Ezra says the Jewish people lived in various towns. So he had to go. He had to take a trip to meet this woman. She wasn't the woman next door. Lived in a different town within the Jewish town. So that's what it means he went. It's certainly a good shot, literally, in what it would mean he went. But the obvious question, and this is what the Ramban says, why would this be relevant for us to know? You should know that it was a 27-minute commute for him. Well, why is that important for us to say? Bialdati, the Ramban says, I think the pshat over here is Bavur Shelo Choshash L'Gzeras Paro. He didn't worry about Paro's decree. V'lokach lo isha l'holid mimena banim, and he decided to marry this woman, to have children. Amra Kasav came. That's why the pasuk says this. Kibachom is dares lasos inyan chadash yomer came. Generally speaking, the Ramban says in Tanakh, when it says vayelach, a person went, it means a person made a conscious decision to go and do it. That it wasn't easy to do, and it's a very powerful thing to reflect on. That Moshe was only born because his parents made a conscious decision to go against the grain and do this. And it's actually not an accurate telling of the story to say his parents happened to be married and they had a child. The importance of the story begins with his parents decided that they were going to do this despite Paro's decree. And the decision was the first step. And so he says, that's the pshat vayelech, that he went, that he was determined. Very, very few great things happen in this world without people making a conscious decision to do something that they think it's really important and they've got to do it. Very few great things happen just because it just feels like convenient in the moment. Below hizkira kasov shem ha'ish, below shem ishto asher lokach. We actually mentioned this in passing earlier in the week. This is such an interesting pasuk because it doesn't tell us their names. And we find out their names later in the Torah. So it's not like the Torah doesn't want to tell us who Moshe's parents were. So why doesn't it tell me here who Moshe's parents were? Historically, Yachsam, Lahaskir, Miaviem, Vaviaviem, Elevi, the Achshav Yirtzel Lekatzer, Adleidas HaMoshiach. Ramban says, you know how it is in the Torah. If the Torah tells us the name, it wouldn't be enough. Oh, what was the name? That's the name. Who's the father? Who's the grandfather? We'd have to trace the lineage back to Levi. That's how the Torah normally introduces names. So the Ramban says, we just want to cut to the chase right now. This is such a core part of the story. We'll tell you later on what the family tree is. And very interesting in Parshas Va'era, next week's Parsha, Torah goes through, excuse me, the Torah goes through the lineage of other tribes for the sake of telling us this lineage. The Aderech Pshat, Ramban says one more thing here. The straightforward understanding is that this was the beginning of their marriage, a muktam mucha b'parsha, that we're not going in chronological order here. Kodem Zeras Paro. This was before the decree of Paro. The Yoldam Miriam va'Aaron. V'achar kein gazer Paro kol abein yilod v'teil abein hatov hazeh. V'lo hiskar akasav leidas Miriam va'Aaron k'lo haya b'lei dasam chidesh davar. The Ramban just says, the Medrash notwithstanding, the straightforward understanding of this story is that Amram married Yocheved. They had been married for years. They had these two earlier children. Not the whole remarriage thing that the Gemara says, but that's, of course, the Gemara's pshat. So if this is all part of a continuous story, so why doesn't it mention the births of Miriam and Aaron? They were born before Moshe. They clearly were born before Moshe. So Ramban says, we'll tell you that later also. But the point is that there wasn't anything novel about the births of Miriam and Aaron. There was something very novel about the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now the Ramban goes over to this point. We kind of filled it in already with the Gemara that this was actually a remarriage. He had separated from his wife because of Paro's decree and because of his daughter's urging, they reconnected. The Asaba Masa Likuchim, and he actively remarried her. Really interesting measures to hear. Hoshiva Ba'Piryon, he put her in a glorious place, like a canopy. Miriam v'Aaron were acting l'fanea, and Miriam and Aaron were dancing in front of her. They made like a family wedding. They said, "Go out in Israel." If you understand that this is the prophecy of the daughter, that the great child will be born here, this is a moment that they're building the Jewish people right now. Aaron was 3 years old. What do you mean Aaron's dancing? Well, what's this about? God made him happy. Or his sister told him to be happy, so he was happy. But just an interesting sort of filling in of the story. Okay. In verse 2, which we already read, it says that she saw that he was good. What does that mean, that she saw that he was good? What do the words mean? That Yocheved, the mother, saw that Moshe, the baby, was good. And then, by the way, it says that she hid him. So first of all, what does it mean he was good? Second of all, and if he wouldn't have been good, you wouldn't have hidden him. Both aspects are challenging. Ramban on Pasuk Beis, Vatero so kitovu vatitzbeneu. Yodua kikol anashim oavos esbeneihem. All mothers think their children are great. Yafim v'she'enam yafim. Maybe objectively some of them are beautiful or handsome. Maybe some of them aren't. Don't ask the mother. The mother's always going to have the same opinion. V'kulan titzpeno sam b'choy choltan. Mother would have hidden her child in this situation as much as possible. What does it mean that because she saw he was good, did she think he was good than anybody else's kid that she would have thought? And that's why she hit him. It's difficult to understand. The meaning of this goodness that she saw is she saw something very uniquely good in him. And she thought to herself, there is something remarkable about this baby, which we're going to talk about in a second. But there is something remarkable about this baby. And she thought to herself, even though it's obviously hopeless to try to save my baby boy, the Egyptians are looking for the baby boys. if God brought me such a uniquely special baby, maybe, just maybe, there'll be a miracle. And so she put forth extra effort. She left no stone unturned to try to figure out how to hide this baby. She really thought it through. What would be the best strategic way to hide this baby? Because there was something special about this baby. So if anybody's going to be miraculous to say it's going to be this baby, and when she saw that she couldn't do it anymore, she thought to herself, you know what? He's going to be saved in another way. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have thought to yourselves before, what kind of crazy plan was this? Put him in some basket and send him down the river? I want to remind you of the Ramban's pshat. The Ramban said it wasn't even the soldiers going door to door. It was the citizenry of Egypt going door to door. So you're gonna just send them down the river, and there's all these people walking around looking to kill this baby. What hope is there in that? How do you know he's even going to survive? Forget it. Maybe he won't even survive before anyone catches him. Says the Ramban, she said to herself, she's still relying on miracles. So she did everything she possibly could to save him. And now everything's a dead end now. But she still doesn't want to give up. So she does something that seems crazy because it's better than the alternative. The Astalotevas Goma, she made this basket for him. This famous thing, as we say later in the Psukim, that Miriam watched from a distance to see what would happen. And all of this reinforces the pshat of our rabbis. Shadarshu, they taught Kitovhu, that he was good. Shenismale kol abayis ora. Famous thing. Rashi brings it down that when he was born, the house filled up with light. Fortunately, Mom, it's not that he just screamed really loudly when he came out. This seems to be, Rashi doesn't say that pshat, unfortunately. Ulama sha'amru, family joke. Ulama sha'amru, sha'isa Miriam misnabes, asidim mishetelik bein shemoshias Yisrael. He says there's another thing here. Remember, we already referenced that there's a medrash that Miriam had a prophecy. The older sister had a prophecy that she'd have a brother that would save the Jewish people. So that's what it means. She saw that he was good. Maybe it means that he also filled the house with light, or maybe it just means she knows this. There's this prophecy about this child, so she can leave no stone unturned. It's just a very, very interesting perspective on the story. Okay, let's jump ahead now to verse 23. So we've been very focused on Moshe and his family. Now back to sort of macro perspective on what's going on in Egypt. And excuse me, Moshe has fled. Fast forward, Moshe's taken into the palace. Moshe goes to see his Jewish brethren. Moshe kills an Egyptian. Word gets out. Moshe flees Egypt, and he goes to live in Midian, and he meets Tzipporah, and he marries Tzipporah, and Moshe starts building a family. But now back to Egypt, verse 23. And it was in those numerous days, and the king of Egypt died. And the Jewish people groaned from the work, and they cried out. And their cries came up to God from the work. This pasuk sounds like the Jewish people were very upset that the king of Egypt died, which it's very hard to understand. Why would they be upset that the king of Egypt died? So, in other words, it sounds like they're crying because the king of Egypt died and there was a lot of work. So we'll pick up with this tomorrow. What's the big deal that the king of Egypt died? And why is it distressing that the king of Egypt died? So this morning we spoke about what's meant in the phrase that there was a man from Levi who went. Why does it say he went at all? Why does it say he married a woman? And what is it meant with that she saw that her son was good?